Hey, how's it going and welcome to another video. Alright, so before I get into it, I wanted to say that this video is sponsored by the folks at Atlus. They were kind enough to send me a copy of the game to review, so big shout out to them for the hookup. But yeah, Soul Hackers 2. Honestly, at least to me, like, the fact that this game even exists is still kind of weird, because, like, Devil Summoner Soul Hackers was originally a game that came out on the Sega Saturn and PS1 back in 1997. And it wasn't even available to people who speak English until, like, it got a 3DS port in 2012. And it was definitely a pretty niche release, like, people who enjoyed those kinds of games got a kick out of it. And Soul Hackers definitely has a dedicated fan base, but, you know, it wasn't exactly like one of the Persona games or something that was kind of in the public consciousness in the past couple of years, so the announcement of it getting a sequel was just so kind of out of left field, right? But yeah, here we are in the year of our Lord 2022, and Soul Hackers 2 exists. Also, I want to specify that this is going to be a no spoiler review. I'm not going to be talking about any story or character specific stuff, but I will be giving my overall thoughts on it. And I figured I'm probably going to get a lot of questions about this, so for anybody who wants to know if you need to have played Soul Hackers 1 to enjoy this game, the answer is unequivocally no. The game shares a couple of concepts and like groups from the original game, but anything that was in the original Soul Hackers is like given an explanation here, so yeah, you can feel free to play this one without having played the original. So if you want a quick kind of like thesis statement on how I feel about this game, you know, I gotta keep it real and say I wasn't too crazy about this one. And it's not even one of those cases where I would say that it's like a bad game. I would say, is it a good game? Like, yeah, it's good. But it was definitely one of those cases where I found that there was very, very little that I loved about it. But to start off with something kind of positive, one thing that I can definitely say I really, really enjoyed was the overall art style and presentation. The characters are designed by Shiro Miwa, who's a newcomer to the series. I wasn't really familiar with the guy's work before I kind of looked into him, but he's the author of the manga Dogs, Bullets, and Carnage, and he was the character designer on the Trigger anime Kisniver. But yeah, I ended up liking this guy's art a lot. I think it gives it a pretty unique kind of flavor compared to every other game in the series. It has a very kind of like manga-like appearance, which makes a lot of sense considering he is a manga author. And he does some really good designs. I especially like the duo of Ringo and I'm still not sure how you're supposed to pronounce this chick's name. I believe it's pronounced Fig. At least that's what they say in the English dub, but maybe it's supposed to be Figu? I don't know. Those two I think have really good designs. Honestly, most of the characters in this game I think have good designs. Like, even a lot of the shopkeepers, I was like, yo, you look sick. Like, dog, look at this character. Hell yeah, bro. And his art also gives all the characters some really, really expressive faces. Like, Ringo in particular is just a lot of fun to watch her kind of like make all these weird faces, whether she's confused or happy or whatever it happens to be. And it makes watching these conversations unfold a lot of fun. So yeah, for the art department, I think they definitely nailed it. I wouldn't mind seeing Shiro Miwa return to design some more characters or do art for the series. Really, really enjoyed his art and character designs. And I guess since this kind of sort of goes hand in hand with the character designs, I gotta say, I found the setting of Soul Hackers 2 to be pretty forgettable overall. And I think that's especially a shame because I think the setting of Soul Hackers 1 was definitely one of its strongest aspects. Just that very 90s cyberpunk view of the future when the idea of computers and the internet and like virtual reality were all the coolest shit ever. And I think it's a setting that has especially kind of like aged like weirdly well considering, I think now it's at the point where you could probably consider it to be like, I don't know, retro cyberpunk, is that a term? If not, I'm gonna copyright it, but you know, it was definitely a game that was very much surrounded by this kind of like excitement about the possibilities of technology that I think is becoming more and more difficult to replicate these days. So yeah, that was definitely one of the coolest things about Soul Hackers 1, but yeah, I found the setting of this game really just did very, very little for me overall. I think it kind of comes across as a very dry vision of the future, since even though there are definitely a lot of kind of like supernatural, fantastical elements going on, but it's mostly just a lot of neon and like flashy signs. One thing that I do think is kind of cool is how you get to see all the different demons show up throughout the city. Like, if you go to Karakucho, I think it is, you can see just like a giant black frost hanging out on a building. And then there's also the Mansei realm, which is like this like hidden subsection of the city that's only accessible by summoners. And there's stuff like the comp smith where you can upgrade your comp, and There's a special item store, and there's people that are just hanging out with their demons. So yeah, there's definitely some cute details, but in general, I just found it to be a pretty, like, dull setting. Maybe dull isn't necessarily the right word, but I think it doesn't really interest me that much because it's presented as this kind of, like, near future sort of cyberpunk. Like, they're not far enough into the future where they have crazy shit going on, like, you know, people aren't plugging wires out of their head to, like, go into computers like in Ghost in the Shell or something, but it's also missing a lot of that, like, you know, early cyberpunk kind of, like, 80s, 90s sort of, I don't know, innocence, I guess, to where, you know, for a lot of people back then, the idea of owning a 1 terabyte hard drive would have been, like, fucking mind-blowing. But I don't know, if you like very shiny, glowy environments, like, you'll probably get a kick out of it. It does look very nice, I will say that. I like all the kind of, like, really bright pink and purple colors going on. But otherwise, yeah, it sadly didn't do a whole lot for me. Right, so before I talk about the gameplay, here's a pro tip. Nam's Compendium let me know about this. The game has these, like, tips that show up in the loading screens, right? But when you go into the menu, like, you have the option to turn them off. For whatever reason, when you turn them off, it improves the load time significantly. Like, here's a before and after from when I had it on and when I had it off. You'll notice when they're on, it takes a much longer time to load, but the second you turn them off, the loading times are much, much better. So I would highly recommend everybody do that. You're not really missing out on much. A lot of it is just information the game has already told you or stuff that's pretty obvious. So yeah, I would definitely consider turning those tips off. Alright, so as for the actual gameplay of Soul Hackers 2, it is a 3D, turn-based, dungeon-crawling RPG, definitely in the same vein as games like Nocturne or Digital Devil Saga, where you recruit and fuse demons to become more powerful and such. So a lot of that probably sounds pretty familiar to anybody who's played a game in the series, but Soul Hackers 2 definitely has its own kind of unique quirks about it. And one thing that I found very kind of off-putting is, of all things, Ringo's movement. So unlike pretty much, I think, every other protagonist in the series, Ringo has this sort of like momentum-based movement where it takes a second for her to really start running, which isn't that big of a deal. The thing that's weird is that this also applies to her stopping. Like, she doesn't just stop on a dime the way the other characters do, she takes a second to slow down. And this leads to a lot of really weird shit. Like, I have tons of footage of me trying to talk to NPCs. Like, I'll interact with the NPC, I'll be moving at full speed, I'll try to talk to them, and Ringo will just keep going. But the one really, really odd quirk about this, and I don't know how this got past testing, but her momentum carries over when you go through teleporters as well. Anytime you interact with a teleporter when you're moving at full speed, her momentum will carry over past the teleport. And this leads to a lot of really odd, like, quirks with the physics. I've had numerous times where Ringo has walked backwards or sideways, sometimes running directly into enemies. So yeah, that was just something that I found really, really odd. Like, you kind of get used to it, but it's just one of those things where I stop and kind of wonder, like, why is it like this? Alright, so to talk about the combat a little bit, Soul Hackers 2, I think it unfortunately works with a sort of gimped version of, like, the typical Megami Tensei combat, where things still have elemental weaknesses, but there's no press turn. Ordinarily, how these games work is you hit a weakness and then you get another stack of actions, or if you're playing Persona, it has the one more system, which is like kind of similar but not exactly the same. But basically, they work with the overall philosophy of if you hit a weakness, you get another action. That system is not in this game. Instead, it works with a pretty generic, like, hit a weakness, it does more damage kind of system. But one new thing the game does have are the Sabbaths, which are kind of like an odd combo of the all-out attacks from the modern Persona games and the Demon Co-op from Strange Journey. Basically, the Demon Co-op was the system in Strange Journey. Like, Strange Journey similarly didn't have press turn, but if you hit an enemy's weakness, your demons would kind of gang up on them and do, like, AoE damage to everybody. So basically, the way they work is every time you hit an enemy with a weakness, you gain another stack of Sabbath, and it caps out for how many demons you have. So assuming you have, like, 8 demons in your stock, then the Sabbath maxes out at 8. And assuming you have at least 1 stack of Sabbath, at the end of your attacking turn, the demons will be unleashed to do, like, essentially an all-out attack on the enemies. And I think the Sabbaths are pretty cool to look at, like, especially when you get a ton of demons working together. It's a pretty cool sight to behold, but God, I really, really wish this game had press turn. Like, without that system in place, it really does just feel like a pretty generic RPG. Sabbaths are fun to play around with, and they definitely get more, like, kind of intricate the more you get into the game. Since throughout the course of it, you'll unlock what's called command skills, which basically, like, they take a certain amount of turns to charge up. And then they let you do special shit in battle. Like, one command skill allows you to kind of like focus your Sabbath in on one target, and it does more damage to that target at the cost of it not hitting all the rest of the demons. And some demons will learn skills that like work with the Sabbath, so some demons might learn a skill that's like, oh yeah, if you hit a Sabbath, then you can trigger this and it'll lower their defense. Or one demon might have a skill that drains MP. And these are cool, but you can only activate one per Sabbath, so if you have one demon that has the draining skill and one that has like the defense lowering skill, you can only use one per turn, which is like a fine restriction. Like, it'd probably be a little bit too busted if you could just unleash like a billion status effects and debuff them and shit. So Sabbaths, I think that they're a fun system, and I'm glad to see them doing a little bit of experimentation with the games. But you know, I gotta be honest, I felt like throughout most of the playthrough, there was kind of just this sort of goblin in my head that was like, yeah, this combat system is like fine, but yo, SMT4 Apocalypse is right on your shelf, man. You know, yo, Persona 5 Royal is looking pretty good right now. I don't know. And the system for using demons is also pretty interesting. Of all things, it's the most similar to Persona 1 and 2, to where you don't actually summon the demons, you equip them like personas. And the character that they're equipped to kind of gains the properties of that persona, like they gain its weaknesses and its moves and stuff. But unlike the modern games, you can equip them to anybody, so you're not just limited to your protagonist. So yeah, kind of a throwback to Persona 1 and 2. Like, you don't summon the demons, you just equip them to your party, which I think is a fair system. But my biggest complaint about it is definitely the fact that, like, I don't really feel like I'm using the demons in combat. They're kind of just equipped to them as like an afterthought, and they don't even do any animations really. Like, all the animations are done by the characters. It's not like the demon shows up and does the attack for them. One thing that I did think was really charming is how, at the beginning of every dungeon, Ringo actually deploys the demons out into the field. And throughout the course of the dungeon, you'll see them offering you, like, different items, or they'll say, like, yeah, let me heal you, or just whatever it happens to be. And I think that's a lot of fun. It's kind of cool seeing these guys, like, on the field, out doing stuff while you're kind of fighting in combat. It's cool to see. I wouldn't mind seeing this come back, but one thing that, like, I actually did not like at all, this sort of drove me insane, was actually the way you acquire new demons. So this game does not have any demon negotiations. You're not able to talk to demons in combat. There's nothing like the devil auction or anything like that. Instead, the way it works is the demons that you have deployed out onto the field will sometimes essentially find a demon that wants to join your crew, and then you get into some of the easiest demon negotiations in the entire series. Throughout my entire playthrough, the demons only ever ask for one thing. You know, they might be like, oh, I want 10,000 yen, or I want your MP, or I want life stones, or whatever. And as long as you give them that thing, they'll pretty much immediately join you. So the process of recruiting them is pretty easy, but I found that the overall, like, level ratio of the demons corresponding to where you were at was really, really fucked up. And what I mean by that is basically like, so demons of a higher level will basically never join you. But otherwise the demons will be like, no, fuck off, idiot. But I had so goddamn many times when I would see that one of my demons on the field had like a demon that wanted to join me. So I'd walk over there, talk to him, and then the demon would be like, your level is too low, fuck you. And then they'd leave. And this is really, really annoying because getting the, like, event or whatever when a demon joins you feels pretty uncommon. I'd say it's definitely the rarest of the, like, demon events. I'd say about 20, maybe about 20% of all of them are, like, demon recruitments. And your demon allies won't show up on the map unless you've actually been fighting shit. So you can't just wander around looking for new demons. You need to get into fights, beat the demons, and then kind of just hope that your demons on the field will, like, find new demons to join you. I think I said demons about 12 times in the past 30 seconds. And I think it ended up just feeling kind of like an annoying system because it kind of felt like the game was just wasting my time, essentially. You know, I don't know if I was just continuously under-leveled throughout the whole game, but I found there were so many situations where I was like, I would really like to get some new demons, but all of the demons in the area are too high of a level. So I found myself a lot of the time going to lower level areas, beating up on random encounters, and then just hoping that demons would join me, and then fusing a bunch of those guys together. So yeah, I found this system like really got on my nerves, and you know, I've never really felt this feeling in one of these games before where I've wanted to get new demons, and it feels like I wasn't even able to try. Since in some of the other games, you might have a pretty kind of frustrating string of events with the demons where you give them everything they want and they just like fucking leave, right? Or you just mess up the negotiation over and over and over again. Like that kind of stuff is going to happen, but paradoxically, this game manages to have one of the easiest negotiation systems, but I found myself banging my head up against the wall to even start the negotiations to begin with. So yeah, that's something that I really wish I could just talk to the demons. That would have made my playing experience with this a lot better. And it unfortunately kind of had a side effect where I found that even fusing the demons just wasn't as fun because of the tedium involved in getting them. Demon fusion is pretty much the same as it's been in the last couple of games, but I just found that I did less fusing overall because I had less demons to work with. And that's kind of another problem I just remembered, is that it feels like the area's like diversity of demons is very limited. That's another problem you will run into, is you might be in an area looking for some demons, and more often than not you'll find one that wants to join you, but uh-oh, you already have his brother or cousin, like you have the same demon in your stock, and so that demon is going to be like, yeah, I'll pass, whatever. So that's really annoying. You take the kind of like 1-2 punch of, uh-oh, your level's too low, and also sometimes you run into a demon that is the right level, but you already have them. And it really just feels like this really annoying gamble with getting new demons. Like, this system kind of drove me nuts. One thing that I did find pretty fun was actually how you customize your party members. Since you basically go and you exchange materials you get from killing demons or just finding stuff in the environment, and you use it to upgrade their comps. And they have all sorts of different shit that you can upgrade, like the affinity system makes a return, so you can kind of build your characters to be more specifically attuned to certain elements, like let's say you want to make Ringo into your electricity mage. You'll probably spend more resources like bumping up her electric affinity. Some characters have unique skills that are more geared towards like finding items, like Saizo, for example, has a thing you can learn where every time you use a consumable item, it has a chance of just not being used. Ringo gets access to a lot of scanning, kind of utility stuff. Milady learns a unique almighty attack called Piercer. And the characters also get unique traits from exploring what's called the Soul Matrix. Basically, if you make enough progress in these dungeons, then you can unlock unique traits, and you're actually given a choice between a couple of different options. And it's fun to just build these characters and kind of think like, okay, which of these new things you could learn, like which would be more useful? And speaking of that, so the dungeons. Overall, I found the dungeons in this game to be annoying. I don't know how else to put it, but I found that a lot of especially the dungeons later on, really relied on this philosophy of like, did you guess wrong or take the wrong path? Your time is wasted. Kind of stuff. Like, this game has a fucking real fixation on teleporters. Especially a lot of the kind of like final floors of the Soul Matrix are just these fucking big teleporter mazes. They just take you to random locations, and it's essentially just like a guessing game. And I think the overall kind of like the design of the dungeons, they're in this kind of peculiar place where they're definitely not as difficult as something like Nocturne or the Digital Devil Saga games, but they're not really as easy as something like, you know, the way like Persona 4 kind of handled its dungeons, for example. So they're probably not going to appeal to like super like really into hardcore dungeons kinds of people, but I don't know, I just found them to be very tedious, I guess is the best way of putting it. Like, here's a pro tip. If you ever encounter an area where you're essentially forced to make a choice between two different teleporters, save your game, and if you're wrong, just reload it. It will save you a lot of time. I don't know, gameplay wise, I found this one to be really hit or miss. I think the highlight for me was definitely just like the approach to building your characters, but just about everything else about it I found to either be like not that interesting or just kind of annoying. Like the actual combat is fine, but it definitely feels like a gimped version of SMT or even like Persona's combat. Getting demons drove me slightly insane. Fusion is still fun, but the dungeons weren't really challenging enough to be like enjoyable, so I found I spent a lot of time kind of just mindlessly going through them. I don't know, I found playing the game to just be like really aggressively okay. And it honestly just kind of made me think like, damn, if I wanted like hard dungeons, I could play Nocturne. If I wanted like a combat system I really like, I could play SMT4 Apocalypse. Sabbaths are fun, they're a neat system, but I really don't feel like they make up for the lack of press turn. So to talk a little bit about the characters and the story, I sadly once again found them to be like, okay. I think it's a fine crew of characters, but they really didn't do a whole lot for me. I think my favorite character out of the bunch is definitely Saizo. I thought he was pretty cool. He's like a flirtatious playboy with a taste for the finer things in life. And I also like his design a lot with his hat and his shark teeth. How he never really shows his eyes. I think that's pretty cool, but overall, I found that I kind of like the group dynamic, maybe a little bit less than I was hoping for, since, you know, I don't want to bring up the dreaded P word in relation to character interactions. The P word is Persona, by the way, but I was definitely expecting something that was more kind of in line with how Persona handles this stuff. Like, for example, there's a system called soul levels, which are vaguely kind of sort of like social links, but not really. Essentially, the function of the soul levels is that it unlocks further areas in the character's soul matrix, and that's where you learn more about like their backstory and kind of what's going on in their minds, and that in turn is how you unlock like new abilities for them. It's definitely not like a fully fleshed out, you know, confidant or social link kind of system. One thing that I did think was pretty fun are the hangouts that you can have with them. Basically, as you go through the story and finish side quests, you unlock these little hangouts where you can invite the characters and kind of just talk about the stuff that's happened, like their history, their interests, what they thought about the side quests you just did. And I think that stuff is pretty fun. I think it's really neat whenever like it feels as if side quests are something that have actually kind of had an effect on these characters. Like, it's just fun to see them talk about central figures that were involved in the side quest, or villains' motivations for doing stuff, how they would have handled the situation. I think that stuff is pretty charming, and for what it's worth, I think they're pretty, like, they're okay conversations that they have. And yeah, they're a fine crew. I really just, I don't know, I don't feel like I'm super attached to these characters in particular. And I think that's especially a shame because Soul Hackers 2 is definitely a more kind of like character-focused game, and characters tend to be the things in games that I kind of like gravitate towards the most, so yeah, walking away from the experience and not really having like a new character that I'm really into, I think is kind of unfortunate. And like I said, I'll be saving my thoughts on the story overall for a later video, but you know, I gotta say, I also found the story of this game to be very fine. Like, I couldn't make one of those everything wrong with Soul Hackers 2 story kinds of videos, but I just found the overall plot and conflict that was going on to be pretty, like, I don't know, predictable and just not particularly interesting. And I found it also didn't really present any kind of like themes or concepts that I thought were particularly interesting. And at least to me, it sort of just felt like a pretty been there, done that kind of cyberpunk story. Overall, I just found it to be sort of forgettable. Like, it's definitely not schlocky. You know, schlock is great. If this was just like a goofy, hokey fucking story, like if this was like a Devil Survivor 2 or something that's just kind of cheesy and over the top and a lot of fun, then I would have enjoyed it. But no, it plays itself pretty seriously, so hopefully you'll get some more enjoyment out of it. But at least for me, it really just didn't do all that much for me. So yeah, like, man, I wish I had more good things to say about it, but it really did just end up being one of those games that I found, like, really aggressively alright. Like, I think I would much rather have a game where there's a lot of stuff that I really love and there's a couple things that I hate, instead of a game where I'm like, most of this is fine, you know? I found that the characters are like really okay, the story was very fine. The gameplay in a lot of ways kind of just feels like a gimped version of other games in the series. And at least for me, the biggest offenders are no press turn and how annoying it is to get new demons. The dungeons are okay, but for a lot of them, I felt like I was really just on autopilot. Honestly, for a lot of these, it kind of just reached the point where I was just like, I just had YouTube popped up in in the mini player, just like watching them as I went through. Really just not stuff that's super engaging, but I did end up liking the art and the character designs, and the soundtrack is pretty good, like especially a lot of the boss themes I really enjoyed. But beyond just my own kind of like mixed reception to it, I find it's also one of those games where I think I kind of struggle to think of who I would really recommend it to. Since a lot of the time I might have these games where I'm like, you know what, it wasn't really for me, but I think for this crowd, they would really enjoy it, right? But honestly, I'm not entirely sure who that crowd is. I can definitely say it's not a must-play for fans of the original Soul Hackers. It has very, very little to do with that game. The setting feels very different. The approach to character designs is pretty different. If you like that kind of 90s cyberpunk energy it has, you're probably not gonna really find it here. It's Soul Hackers 2, but it doesn't really feel like a Soul Hackers sequel, you know? And I also don't think I can really recommend it to people who are looking to kind of like expand their horizons with the series, since there's always going to be people who maybe the only games in the series you've played is like you've played Persona 5 and now you're looking to check out a lot of the other games. You know, I feel like you've already played a more intricate, more fun version of this combat system. This also applies if you've played SMT5 or SMT4 or Nocturne or Digital Devil Saga. But if the idea of like this really fucking odd love child of Persona 1 and 2's like demon, or like in Persona's cases like it's Persona equipping mechanics, as well as the demon co-op from Strange Journey, then yeah, this game might be right up your alley, but I think the lack of press turn is just really pretty unfortunate. And in the same vein, I feel like if you're into, you know, the mainline games or you just like the series in general, there's really nothing new to see here. Like, Sabbaths are kind of a fun gimmick, but I don't think they're enough to carry the whole system. Demon Fusion is still a lot of fun, so if you're just like a demon fusing fiend, then this might be worth checking out, but like I said, just getting the demons felt like kind of an annoying process, so that experience I think is replicated with a lot of other games in the series. So yeah, I think this is sadly going to end up being a game that really struggles to find like a dedicated audience that is really into this specifically, which is a shame since the game definitely has some good stuff going for it, but yeah, overall, I really just found it to be a pretty okay experience. I think it's worth checking out, but like, man, I would probably wait for a price drop, honestly. But you know, your experience with this definitely may vary. You might end up really enjoying the characters or the story or having a lot of fun with the gameplay. There is definitely fun to be had in the game, but I just found it to be very, very alright. It's like, it's good. And that I think that's about as much as I could give it. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching, especially a big thank you to my channel members. I wish I liked this one more, man. Like, I never ever get any pleasure from disliking stuff, but you know, sometimes games just come along and it's like, you just don't really feel all that much about them. But yeah, this one was, it was alright. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time.